The billionaire invited his ex-wife to his wedding to humiliate her, but her arrival left everyone speechless. When you invite your ex-wife to your wedding intending to humiliate her, you'd better be absolutely certain she hasn't become everything you threw away, and more than you could ever deserve. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Drop it in the comments below. It always amazes me how far these stories travel, from the US to Canada, the UK, Africa, and beyond. And while you're here, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like so you won't miss the next story. Now let's get started. The crystal chandeliers of the Sterling Industries boardroom cast prismatic light across the mahogany conference table as Robert Sterling straightened his Armani tie and reviewed his wedding guest list one final time. At 34, he commanded a tech empire worth $4 billion, but today his focus wasn't on quarterly projections or market expansions. Today was about orchestrating the perfect moment of vindication. Sir? His assistant, Jennifer, hovered nearby with her tablet. The final RSVP confirmations are in. 250 guests confirmed for Saturday's ceremony. And Gabrielle? Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the anticipation coursing through him. Ms. Washington confirmed this morning. She'll be arriving Friday evening. Robert felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost physical. After 3 years of silence since their divorce, his ex-wife had actually accepted his wedding invitation. The woman who'd once accused him of being cold and calculating was about to witness him marry Madison Whitmore, a woman who represented everything Gabrielle wasn't. Madison was old money, sophisticated, connected to every influential family from Miami to Martha's Vineyard. She understood the importance of social positioning, appreciated the finer things in life, and never questioned his priorities. Unlike Gabrielle, who'd wanted him to choose between business dinners and quiet nights at home, Madison enhanced his empire instead of trying to diminish it. Make sure Ms. Washington is seated in Section C, Robert instructed. Close enough to see everything clearly. Jennifer made a note, though something in her expression suggested discomfort with the arrangement. She'd worked for Robert for 5 years, had known Gabrielle during their marriage, and had always found her warm and genuine. But Robert was her boss, and his personal vendetta wasn't her business to question. 1,500 miles away, in the sleek corner office of Washington Global Consulting in Chicago, Gabrielle Washington stood before floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Her reflection stared back at her, poised, powerful, wearing a tailored blazer that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But today, her usual confidence was tinged with something else: curiosity about why Robert had invited her to his wedding. "Are you sure about this?" Her business partner and best friend, Alicia Torres, leaned against the doorframe with 2 cups of coffee. "You don't owe him anything, Gabby. Especially not your presence at his victory lap." Gabrielle accepted the coffee, her manicured fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. "I'm not going for him, Ollie. I'm going for me." "To prove what? That you're over him?" "Because building a billion-dollar company in 3 years pretty much did that already." Gabrielle smiled, an expression that held secrets Alicia couldn't quite read. "Maybe I want to see if he's actually happy. Maybe I want closure. Or maybe..." She paused, looking out at the lake. "Maybe I want to see his face when he realizes that throwing me away was the biggest mistake of his life." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "Now that sounds more like the Gabby I know. What are you planning?" "Nothing dramatic. I'm just going to show up, be gracious, and let my success speak for itself." Gabrielle turned from the window, her expression shifting to something that made Alicia understand why Fortune magazine had called her the Phoenix Rising in last month's cover story. "Robert invited me because he thinks he can humiliate me. He wants to parade his upgrade in front of the woman he considered beneath him. What he doesn't realize is that I've become everything he threw away, and more than he ever deserved." The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 years ago, when Robert had served her with divorce papers and a settlement that barely covered her student loans, Gabrielle had been devastated. She genuinely loved him, had believed in their future together, had supported his ambitions even when they meant sacrificing her own dreams. But heartbreak had a way of clarifying priorities. Using the small settlement and her MBA from Northwestern, Gabrielle had started a consulting firm focused on helping minority-owned businesses navigate complex corporate structures. Her combination of analytical brilliance and genuine empathy had attracted clients who'd been overlooked by traditional consulting giants. Within 18 months, she'd landed contracts with Fortune 500 companies seeking authentic diversity partnerships. Within 3 years, Washington Global had offices in 6 cities and annual revenues approaching 9 figures. "The jet is ready whenever you are," Alicia said, checking her phone. "And your dress arrived this morning. It's stunning." Gabrielle had chosen her outfit carefully, a custom emerald green gown that complemented her skin tone perfectly while projecting both elegance and power. She wanted to look like exactly what she was. A woman who had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into fuel for extraordinary success. "What time is the ceremony?" 4 p.m. tomorrow. Cocktails at 3. It's being held at his estate in Coral Gables. Apparently they've transformed the entire property into some kind of fairyland wedding venue. Gabrielle wasn't surprised. Robert had always believed that expensive meant impressive, that the size of the spectacle reflected the importance of the occasion. Their own wedding had been intimate, elegant, focused on their love rather than their guest list. She'd thought he appreciated that simplicity. Apparently, she'd been wrong about many things. "And Madison Whitmore?" Gabrielle asked, though she'd already researched Robert's fiancée extensively. 32, daughter of Senator Whitmore, graduated from Yale, sits on the boards of 3 major charities. Alicia's tone was carefully neutral. She's beautiful, accomplished, and comes from the kind of family that probably has their own wing at the Met. Everything Gabrielle wasn't, in other words. At least, everything Robert had convinced her she wasn't during those final, painful months of their marriage when he'd grown increasingly critical of her background, her family, her lack of social sophistication. "She sounds perfect for him," Gabrielle said and meant it. Robert always wanted a wife who could be an asset to his empire. "I wanted a husband who saw me as more than an asset." So why torture yourself by watching him get what he wanted? Gabrielle was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Why was she going? Was it masochism? Curiosity? Or something deeper? A need to prove to herself that she truly moved beyond the woman who'd been dismissed as insufficient? "Because," she said finally, 3 years ago, Robert Sterling made me believe I wasn't enough. That I wasn't sophisticated enough, connected enough, polished enough to be the wife of a successful man. And for a while, I believed him." She moved to her desk, where framed photos showed her with world leaders, celebrities, and business titans who sought her counsel. "I want to see his face when he realizes that the woman he threw away became everything he claimed to value, without him." Friday evening, Miami. The private jet touched down at Miami International's executive terminal as the sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold. Gabrielle had used the 3-hour flight to review quarterly reports and approve expansion plans for the Washington Global's new London office. But as they taxied to the terminal, her business focus gave way to more personal considerations. She'd changed into the emerald gown during the flight, and her reflection in the jet's window showed a woman who commanded attention without demanding it. The dress was sophisticated but not showy, expensive but not ostentatious. Exactly the kind of understated elegance that spoke louder than any logo or price tag. "Ms. Washington?" The flight attendant appeared with a warm smile. "We've arrived and your car is waiting." The car was actually a black Bentley with a driver who treated her with the kind of deference reserved for heads of state. As they drove through Miami's glittering skyline toward her hotel, Gabrielle felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She'd visited this city many times during her marriage to Robert, usually for business functions where she'd felt perpetually out of place among his social circle. Now, she belonged in these circles, not through marriage or inheritance, but through her own accomplishments. The difference was profound. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. I hope you're well. R." Gabrielle stared at the message, analyzing its tone. Polite but distant, with an undercurrent of something that might have been smugness. He was probably imagining her nervous, intimidated, possibly even hoping to win him back by attending his wedding. She typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Congratulations on your engagement." Simple, gracious, giving nothing away. Let him wonder what she was thinking. The Ritz-Carlton in South Beach had prepared the penthouse suite for her arrival, a space that cost more per night than most people's monthly mortgage, with panoramic views of the ocean and the city. Gabrielle had learned to appreciate luxury without being intimidated by it, to see expensive things as tools rather than trophies. As she prepared for bed, laying out her outfit for tomorrow's ceremony, she thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. That Gabrielle had been accomplished in her own right. A successful marketing executive with an MBA and a bright future. But she'd also been insecure, constantly measuring herself against Robert's expectations, trying to mold herself into his vision of the perfect wife. The divorce had shattered that woman completely. But from those pieces, something stronger had emerged, a woman who knew her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's approval, who had built an empire not to prove anything to her ex-husband, but to prove everything to herself. Tomorrow, Robert Sterling would see that woman for the first time. And Gabrielle suspected it would be nothing like what he expected. Her last thought before sleep was a question that would be answered in less than 18 hours. When you invite your past to witness your future, which one ends up defining the present? Have you ever had someone dismiss your worth, only to discover years later that their rejection was actually the greatest gift they ever gave you? Sometimes the people who underestimate us become the very motivation we need to exceed even our own expectations. What do you think? Is there anything more powerful than proving wrong the person who said you'd never be enough? Saturday afternoon, Sterling Estate, Coral Gables. The Sterling Estate had been transformed into something from a luxury magazine spread, thousands of white roses cascading from every surface, crystal chandeliers suspended from silk-draped trees, and a red carpet leading from the main house to an altar that overlooked Biscayne Bay. The guest list read like a who's who of American business and politics, all gathered to witness what society pages would undoubtedly call the wedding of the decade. Robert Sterling stood in his dressing room, adjusting his platinum cufflinks for the third time. His reflection showed a man at the peak of his power, impeccably groomed, wearing a custom tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, about to marry a woman who checked every box on his list of requirements for the perfect wife. So why did he feel this strange undercurrent of anxiety? "You look nervous, darling." Madison Whitmore appeared in the doorway, resplendent in her Vera Wang gown that had taken 6 months to design. She was breathtaking, blonde, elegant, with the kind of effortless sophistication that came from generations of breeding and finishing schools. "Not nervous," Robert replied, kissing her cheek carefully to avoid disturbing her makeup. "Excited. Today is the culmination of everything we've worked toward." Madison smiled, but something in her expression suggested she'd noticed his distraction. "Is it because she's coming? Your ex-wife?" Robert had told Madison about inviting Gabrielle, framing it as a gesture of mature closure. Madison had been gracious about it, which was one of the many things he appreciated about her. She never displayed jealousy or insecurity because she understood her own value too well. "Gabrielle won't be an issue," Robert said. "If anything, seeing her will remind me of how much better my life has become." But even as he said the words, Robert couldn't shake the memory of the text Gabrielle had sent in response to his invitation. Her tone had been different. Not the warm, emotional woman he remembered, but someone cooler, more measured. More like him, actually. "I should finish getting ready," Madison said, checking her diamond watch. The photographer wants to start portraits in 20 minutes. After she left, Robert found himself walking to the window that overlooked the estate's front drive. Guests were already arriving: senators, tech moguls, entertainment industry titans, all coming to celebrate his marriage to Madison Whitmore. It was exactly the kind of wedding he'd always envisioned for himself. So why did he keep thinking about his first wedding? That small ceremony at a vineyard in Napa, where Gabrielle had worn a simple dress she'd found on sale and cried happy tears during their vows. She'd been so genuinely joyful that day, so convinced that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. He'd thought her naive then. Love wasn't enough, compatibility mattered, social positioning mattered, shared goals and values mattered. Madison understood that. She enhanced his life rather than complicating it. A black Bentley pulled up the circular drive, and Robert felt his breath catch. Through the tinted windows, he could see movement, but couldn't make out details. Was this her? Was Gabrielle finally here? The car door opened, and a woman emerged who made Robert's world tilt on its axis. It was Gabrielle, but not the Gabrielle he remembered. This woman moved with a confidence that was almost regal, her emerald gown flowing around her like liquid silk. Even from 3 stories up, he could see that she'd transformed herself completely. Gone was the uncertainty he remembered, the way she'd deferred to his judgment on everything from restaurant choices to career decisions. This woman looked like she'd never deferred to anyone in her life. She paused at the bottom of the steps, and for a moment, Robert could swear she looked directly up at his window. Even at this distance, her gaze seemed to pierce right through him, and he stepped back instinctively. "Sir?" His valet appeared at his shoulder. "The photographer is ready for you downstairs." Robert nodded, but couldn't resist one more look out the window. Gabrielle was walking up the red carpet now, and every eye in the crowd was turning to follow her progress. She wasn't just attending his wedding, she was commanding it. Gabrielle had timed her arrival perfectly. Late enough to make an entrance, early enough to show respect for the ceremony. As she walked up the red carpet, she could feel the weight of 250 gazes assessing her, categorizing her, trying to place her in their social hierarchy. 3 years ago, that attention would have terrified her. Today it energized her. "Gabrielle? Oh my God, is that really you?" She turned to find Jessica Morrison, one of Madison's bridesmaids and a woman who'd been coldly dismissive during Gabrielle's marriage to Robert. Jessica's eyes were wide with something that looked like shock. "Hello, Jessica," Gabrielle said warmly, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "You look lovely. Congratulations on making partner at Morrison and Associates. I read about it in the Times." Jessica's shock deepened. The last time they'd spoken, she'd made pointed comments about Gabrielle's middle-class background and lack of sophistication. Now here was Gabrielle, not only remembering her career milestones but referencing them from the New York Times. Thank you. You look incredible. That dress is..." "Thank you," Gabrielle said simply, not filling the awkward silence. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all. How have you been? Since the divorce?" Gabrielle's smile was radiant and genuine. "I've been extraordinary, actually. Thank you for asking." Before Jessica could probe further, Gabrielle gracefully excused herself and moved toward the cocktail area. But their brief exchange had been overheard by several other guests, and word was spreading quickly through the crowd. Robert Sterling's ex-wife was here, and she wasn't the broken woman they'd expected to see. Gabrielle Washington? She turned to find Senator Whitmore, Madison's father, approaching with his wife. During her marriage to Robert, Gabrielle had met the senator exactly once, at a charity gala where he'd barely acknowledged her existence. "Senator Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore," Gabrielle said with perfect courtesy. "What a beautiful ceremony you've arranged for Madison and Robert." "Thank you, my dear," Mrs. Whitmore said, her eyes clearly appraising Gabrielle's transformation. "I have to say, you look different than I remember." 3 years of growth will do that," Gabrielle replied smoothly. I understand congratulations are in order. I read about Madison's appointment to the Arts Council. Such important work." Senator Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. During their previous meeting, Gabrielle had been quiet, deferential, clearly uncomfortable in political circles. This version of her spoke with the confidence of someone who belonged in any room she entered. "And you, Ms. Washington? What have you been doing with yourself?" "Building businesses, mostly," Gabrielle said modestly. "I run a consulting firm that helps companies develop authentic diversity partnerships. We work with about 60% of the Fortune 500 now." The statement landed like a small bomb. Senator Whitmore's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine attention. 60% of the Fortune 500 meant Gabrielle was playing in the major leagues of American business. "Washington Global Consulting," Mrs. Whitmore said suddenly, recognition dawning. "You're that Gabrielle Washington. The one they wrote about in Forbes last month." "Guilty as charged," Gabrielle said with a self-deprecating smile. "Though I think they were overly generous with their praise." She was being modest, and they all knew it. The Forbes article had called her one of the most influential voices in corporate America and estimated her company's value at over $1 billion. "Well," Senator Whitmore said, his entire demeanor changing, "I'd love to discuss your work sometime. We're always looking for innovative approaches to business development." "I'd be honored," Gabrielle replied, producing an elegant business card. "Please, call my office anytime." As the Whitmores moved away, clearly reassessing everything they thought they knew about her, Gabrielle felt a familiar satisfaction. Not the petty satisfaction of proving people wrong, but the deeper contentment that came from being exactly who she was meant to be. "Ladies and gentlemen," the wedding coordinator's voice carried across the garden, "please take your seats. The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes." Gabrielle made her way to Section C, exactly where Robert had arranged for her to sit. Close enough to see everything clearly, just as he'd intended. But as she settled into her seat, front row, with an unobstructed view of the altar, she suspected Robert's plan might not unfold exactly as he'd imagined. The string quartet began the processional, and the wedding party made their entrance. Bridesmaids in coordinated pastels, groomsmen in identical tuxedos, everything orchestrated to perfection. This was Robert's style, controlled, impressive, designed to send a message about his success and status. And then Madison appeared at the end of the aisle, and Gabrielle had to admit she was stunning. The dress was a masterpiece, her beauty was undeniable, and she moved with the confidence of a woman who'd never doubted her place in the world. But as Madison walked toward the altar, Gabrielle noticed something else. The bride's eyes weren't sparkling with joy or love. They were calm, satisfied, almost businesslike. This wasn't a woman walking toward her great love. This was a woman completing a successful merger. Finally, Robert took his place at the altar, and for the first time in 3 years, Gabrielle found herself looking directly at her ex-husband. He was still handsome, still commanded attention, still carried himself with the authority that had first attracted her to him. But something was missing. The passion, the fire, the dreams they'd once shared, all of it seemed to have been replaced by a cold perfection that was impressive but somehow empty. Robert's eyes swept the crowd, and when they found Gabrielle, she saw his confident expression falter for just a moment. She smiled at him, not smugly, not sadly, but with genuine warmth, and watched as confusion flickered across his face. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. The broken, jealous ex-wife watching his triumph. Instead, he was looking at a woman who seemed genuinely happy for him, completely comfortable in her own skin, and somehow more magnificent than he'd ever seen her. The minister began the ceremony, but Robert found his attention scattered. Every few moments, his gaze would drift to Gabrielle, trying to reconcile the woman he saw with the woman he remembered. She wasn't diminished by being here. If anything, she seemed to be elevating the entire event simply by her presence. "Do you, Robert, take Madison to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The question jolted him back to the moment. This was his wedding day. He was marrying Madison Whitmore, a woman who was perfect for him in every measurable way. Gabrielle was his past, successful past apparently, but still past. "I do," he said firmly. But even as he spoke the words, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the second biggest mistake of his life. The first had been letting Gabrielle go in the first place. The ceremony concluded to thunderous applause, and as the newly married couple kissed, Gabrielle found herself genuinely moved by the spectacle. Not because she harbored any lingering feelings for Robert, but because she recognized the completion of a story, his story, which had diverged from hers 3 years ago and led them both to this moment. As guests moved toward the reception area, Gabrielle became aware of the stir her presence was creating. Conversations paused when she passed, phones discreetly emerged to capture photos, and she overheard fragments of whispered exchanges. "That's his ex-wife? She looks incredible. I heard she's worth over $1 billion now. Did you see her business card? Washington Global Consulting. She doesn't look heartbroken at all." The reception was held in a magnificent pavilion overlooking the bay, with tables set with crystal and gold, centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and a view that belonged in architectural magazines. Robert had spared no expense in creating a celebration worthy of his social aspirations. Gabrielle was seated at table 7, not at the head table with family, but not banished to the back either. A calculated placement that Robert had probably agonized over. Close enough to witness his happiness, far enough to maintain social boundaries. Her tablemates were an interesting mix. A federal judge, the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, a famous author, and their respective spouses. All accomplished people who treated her with the kind of respect reserved for peers rather than the polite condescension she'd experienced during her marriage to Robert. "Ms. Washington," Judge Martinez said as they waited for the first course, "I have to tell you, your work with the Morrison Foundation has been remarkable. The youth mentorship program you designed has changed thousands of lives." "Thank you, Your Honor. Though I have to credit the Foundation's leadership, they had the vision to invest in long-term community building rather than just writing checks." "Modest and brilliant," laughed Dr. Patricia Chin, the pharmaceutical CEO. "I can see why the Times called you the conscience of corporate America." Gabrielle smiled, but her attention was caught by movement at the head table. Robert kept glancing in her direction, his expression unreadable. Madison, radiant in her wedding dress, was holding court with practiced ease, but even she seemed to be stealing glances at Gabrielle's table. The dinner conversation flowed naturally: business strategies, political developments, cultural commentary. Gabrielle found herself genuinely enjoying the company, contributing insights from her unique position at the intersection of corporate power and social responsibility. This was her world now, and she belonged in it completely. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "please welcome our newlyweds for their first dance." Robert and Madison took the floor to a classical waltz, moving with practiced elegance. They were a stunning couple, he in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, she in her flowing gown, the very picture of success and refinement. But watching them, Gabrielle noticed something that probably escaped most observers. They danced beautifully together, but there was no real connection. Their movements were choreographed rather than instinctive, perfect but somehow cold. She remembered dancing with Robert during their own wedding. They'd been terrible at it, stepping on each other's feet, laughing at their mistakes, completely absorbed in each other rather than concerned about how they looked to observers. It had been messy and imperfect and absolutely magical. "May I have this dance?" Gabrielle looked up to find William Chen, Dr. Chen's son and a successful venture capitalist she'd met several times at business functions. He was attractive, accomplished, and had been subtly flirting with her through dinner. "I'd be delighted," she said, accepting his hand. As they moved onto the dance floor, Gabrielle became aware of the attention they were drawing. Other couples made space for them, conversations paused, and she could feel Robert's eyes following their movement. William was an excellent dancer, and they moved together with an ease that spoke to natural compatibility. But more than that, he treated her with genuine respect and interest, asking about her work, sharing insights about emerging markets, engaging with her mind rather than just admiring her appearance. "You know," William said as they swayed to the music, "I've been following your company's growth for months. What you've built is truly impressive." "Thank you. Though I have to say, your fund's approach to sustainable technology investments has been equally remarkable. Perhaps we should discuss a collaboration," he suggested with a smile that was professional but tinged with personal interest. "Perhaps we should," Gabrielle agreed. From across the room, Robert watched the interaction with growing discomfort. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to unfold. Gabrielle was supposed to be impressed by his success, perhaps even regretful about their divorce. Instead, she was being courted by one of the most eligible bachelors in Miami while looking completely at ease in circles that had once intimidated her. "Darling," Madison appeared at his elbow, "you're staring." "I'm not staring," Robert said quickly. "I'm just observing." "She's very beautiful," Madison said diplomatically, "and apparently very successful. The Whitmores were quite impressed with her." "She's done well for herself," Robert admitted grudgingly. "More than well, from what I've heard. Father said she turned down his offer to join his investment group because she's too busy expanding internationally." Robert felt something twist in his chest. Senator Whitmore had offered Gabrielle a position? The same senator who'd barely acknowledged her existence during their marriage? "Robert," Madison's voice carried a note of warning, "whatever you're thinking, don't." "What do you mean?" "I mean that look in your eyes. I've seen it before, when you're analyzing a business opportunity, trying to figure out how to acquire something you want." Madison's smile was perfectly composed, but her words carried steel underneath. "We just got married. Your ex-wife's success, however impressive, is not your concern anymore." Before Robert could respond, the music changed to something more upbeat, and Gabrielle's laugh carried across the dance floor as William spun her gracefully. The sound hit Robert like a physical blow, not because it stirred old feelings, but because it reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Gabrielle had always laughed easily, found joy in simple moments, brought lightness to his often serious world. When had he stopped appreciating that? When had her spontaneity become something to criticize rather than celebrate? "Excuse me," he said to Madison, "I should make sure our guests are enjoying themselves." But instead of circulating among the other tables, Robert found himself drawn toward the dance floor, toward the woman who was supposed to be a footnote in his success story but instead seemed to be writing her own headline. The song ended, and William escorted Gabrielle back toward their table, but Robert intercepted them halfway. "Gabrielle," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had intimidated her during their marriage, "could I have a word?" She looked at him calmly, no trace of the anxiety or eagerness to please that he remembered. "Of course, William, thank you for the lovely dance." "The pleasure was entirely mine," William replied, kissing her hand in a gesture that managed to be both old-fashioned and contemporary. "I hope we'll continue our conversation later." As William walked away, Robert felt an irrational surge of jealousy. "He seems interested." "He's a lovely man," Gabrielle said simply. "Brilliant investor, thoughtful conversationalist, and he actually listens when I talk about my work." The implied comparison wasn't lost on Robert. "Gabrielle, I wanted to thank you for coming today. I know it couldn't have been easy." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. "Why did you invite me, Robert?" "Really?" The direct question caught him off guard. The Gabrielle he remembered would have danced around uncomfortable topics, avoided confrontation, tried to smooth over any tension. This version demanded honesty. "I thought," he began, then stopped. How could he explain that he'd wanted to see her diminished, to prove to himself that choosing Madison over her had been the right decision? "You thought I'd be impressed by all this," Gabrielle said, gesturing to the opulent reception. "You thought I'd see what I'd lost when I lost you." Something like that, Robert admitted. Gabrielle nodded slowly. And what do you see when you look at me now? Robert looked at her, really looked. The woman standing before him bore little resemblance to the insecure, eager-to-please person he'd divorced. This Gabrielle was self-possessed, confident, radiating the kind of inner strength that came from achieving success on her own terms. "I see someone I underestimated," he said quietly. "No," Gabrielle said with a sad smile, "you see someone you never really knew. During our marriage, you were so focused on what I wasn't, sophisticated enough, connected enough, polished enough, that you never saw what I was, or what I could become." Gabrielle. "It's okay, Robert. Really. You did me a favor by leaving. You forced me to discover who I was without trying to be who you wanted me to be." Before he could respond, Madison appeared at his side like a perfectly timed intervention. "There you are, darling," she said, slipping her arm through his. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Madison," Gabrielle said warmly, "congratulations. You look absolutely radiant." "Thank you," Madison replied, her smile polite but cool. "And congratulations on your business success. Everyone's been talking about it." "That's kind of them." An awkward silence stretched between the three of them until Madison broke it with practiced social grace. "Robert, darling, your mother wants to take photos with the family. We should probably—" "Of course," Robert said, but his eyes remained on Gabrielle. Will you still be here later?" "For a while," Gabrielle said. "I promised William I'd save him another dance." As the newly married couple walked away, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just lost something important. But what exactly, he couldn't say. He'd already lost Gabrielle 3 years ago, and he'd married the woman he thought was perfect for him. So why did he feel like the biggest prize at his own wedding was walking away with someone else? When you invite your past to judge your present, sometimes you discover that your present is lacking. Sometimes the person you thought you'd outgrown has actually outgrown you. How do you handle the moment when you realize that letting someone go wasn't a victory, it was the biggest mistake of your life? 2 hours later, the reception was in full swing, guests mingling on the terrace overlooking Biscayne Bay. The string quartet had given way to a jazz ensemble, and champagne flowed as freely as the compliments about the perfect wedding. But beneath the surface celebration, undercurrents of tension were building towards something that would shatter the evening's carefully orchestrated facade. Robert stood near the bar, nursing his third scotch and watching Gabrielle hold court with a group that included 2 senators, a Supreme Court justice, and the CEO of the largest investment firm in the country. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was simply being herself, and they were hanging on her every word. "She's quite something, isn't she?" Robert turned to find his business partner, Marcus Webb, approaching with his own drink. Marcus had been Robert's best man and had known Gabrielle during their marriage. "She's done well for herself," Robert said carefully. "Done well?" Marcus laughed. "Robert, she's built an empire. Washington Global just landed a consulting contract with the European Union worth $200 million. She's not just successful, she's becoming legendary." Robert felt that familiar twist in his chest. "I heard something about European expansion. And did you hear about the Time magazine cover story coming out next month? The new face of American business. They're calling her one of the most influential people under 40 in the world." Each piece of information hit Robert like a small blow. During their marriage, he'd been the successful one, the visionary, the person with unlimited potential. Gabrielle had been supportive, loving, but ultimately just along for the ride. Now she was being hailed as one of the most important business leaders of their generation. "You know what the crazy part is?" Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to Robert's discomfort. "I remember her from your wedding. Sweet, quiet, clearly adored you but seemed kind of intimidated by your world. And now look at her. She's not just in that world, she's reshaping it." "People change," Robert said curtly. "Yeah, they do. Question is, do they change for the better or worse?" Marcus's tone was pointed. Because from where I'm standing, she got the better end of that divorce. Before Robert could respond, the conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the reception tent. Victoria Sterling, Robert's mother, was making her way purposefully toward Gabrielle's group, her expression suggesting she had something important to say. Victoria Sterling was old Miami society, elegant, sharp-tongued, and protective of her family's status with the ferocity of a lioness. During Robert's marriage to Gabrielle, she'd been politely condescending, clearly viewing her daughter-in-law as a temporary inconvenience who would eventually be replaced by someone more suitable. "Dear," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the group, "how wonderful to see you looking so successful." The conversation around them gradually quieted as other guests sensed drama brewing. Gabrielle turned to face her former mother-in-law with perfect composure. "Mrs. Sterling," she said warmly, "thank you for including me tonight. It's a beautiful celebration." "Well, of course we included you," Victoria replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "After all, you're practically family. Or were, anyway." The comment was designed to sting, to remind everyone present that Gabrielle was the discarded wife, the woman who hadn't been good enough to remain a Sterling. But Gabrielle's smile never wavered. "I was very fortunate to be part of your family even briefly," she said graciously. "It taught me so much about what I wanted from life." "And what was that, dear?" "Authenticity," Gabrielle replied simply. "The courage to be myself rather than trying to become someone else's vision of who I should be." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. Around them, the group was watching with the fascination of spectators at a tennis match, heads turning between the two women as they exchanged increasingly pointed pleasantries. "How admirable," Victoria said. "And how fortunate that you found, what was it? A consulting business." The dismissive tone was unmistakable, but before Gabrielle could respond, Senator Whitmore stepped forward. "Victoria, I hope you realize you're speaking to one of the most respected business leaders in the country," he said firmly. "Gabrielle's company has revolutionized how Fortune 500 companies approach diversity and inclusion. She's advised 3 sitting presidents and is personally worth more than most small countries' GDP." Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting such a robust defense from Madison's father. Around them, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. These weren't casual party guests. They were serious people who understood business and power, and they recognized Gabrielle as one of their own. "I'm sure she's done very well," Victoria said stiffly. "She's done exceptionally well," corrected Judge Martinez. "The Supreme Court cited her research in our recent decision on corporate responsibility. She's not just successful, she's influential in ways that will shape policy for decades." Robert watched the exchange with growing discomfort. His mother, who had always been his fiercest defender, was being publicly corrected by some of the most powerful people in the country, all in defense of his ex-wife. "Mother," he said, stepping forward before the situation could escalate further, "perhaps we should let our guests enjoy the party." But Victoria Sterling was not a woman who backed down from confrontation. "I'm simply curious about what Gabrielle has been up to since she left our family. It's wonderful that she's found ways to occupy herself." The condescension was so blatant that several guests actually gasped. But Gabrielle remained perfectly calm, her smile growing warmer rather than colder. "Mrs. Sterling," she said gently, "I understand this must be difficult for you. When Robert and I divorced, you were worried about how it might affect his reputation, his business prospects, his social standing. Those concerns were valid. Divorce can be messy and complicated." Victoria nodded slightly, perhaps thinking Gabrielle was finally showing appropriate deference. "But what I've learned," Gabrielle continued, her voice carrying easily across the now silent crowd, "is that sometimes the most painful experiences force us to discover strengths we never knew we had. Robert's decision to end our marriage was devastating at the time, but it also freed me to become the person I was meant to be." She paused, looking directly at Victoria with something that might have been pity. I'm grateful for that freedom, Mrs. Sterling. Without it, I never would have built a company that employs 12,000 people worldwide, or created programs that have provided education and opportunity to hundreds of thousands of young people, or been invited to advise world leaders on policy that affects millions of lives. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. So while I understand that you may see me as the woman who wasn't good enough for your son, I see myself as the woman who became everything she was capable of being once she stopped trying to be enough for someone else. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria Sterling, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, found herself completely speechless. It was Robert who broke the silence, stepping forward with his jaw clenched and his eyes blazing. "That's enough," he said quietly, but his voice carried an edge that made everyone turn toward him. "Gabrielle, could I speak with you privately?" "Robert," Madison appeared at his side, her face pale. "This isn't the time." "No," he said firmly, his gaze never leaving Gabrielle's face. "This is exactly the time." Gabrielle looked at him for a long moment, weighing something in those dark eyes that had once looked at him with such love and trust. "All right," she said finally, "but not here." Without another word, she walked toward the French doors that led into the house, leaving Robert to follow. Behind them, the crowd erupted in whispered conversations, but neither of them looked back. They found themselves in Robert's study, a room Gabrielle remembered well from their marriage, where he'd spent countless hours working while she sat alone in their living room, wondering when he'd choose her over his spreadsheets. "You want to talk?" she said, turning to face him in the room where he'd once told her their marriage was over. "Let's talk." Robert closed the door behind them, his composure finally cracking. "What the hell was that out there?" "That was your mother trying to humiliate me in front of your wedding guests, and me choosing not to be humiliated." "She wasn't trying to..." "Robert," Gabrielle cut him off with a laugh that held no humor, "your mother invited me to your wedding specifically so she could watch me be diminished by your success. Just like you did. The only problem is, I'm not the same woman you both remember." "No, you're not," Robert said, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. "God, Gabrielle, what happened to you?" "You happened to me," she said simply. "You told me I wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't connected enough, wasn't polished enough to be the wife of a successful man. And for a while, I believed you." She moved to the window that overlooked the bay, the same view she'd once found peaceful during their marriage. "But then I realized something. The problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that I was trying to be enough for someone who couldn't see my value in the first place." "Gabrielle, that's not, isn't it?" She turned to face him, and Robert saw tears in her eyes for the first time all evening. "Robert, do you have any idea what you threw away?" "I didn't throw anything away," he said defensively. "We weren't compatible. We wanted different things." "We wanted the same things," Gabrielle said, her voice breaking slightly. "We wanted love, partnership, family, success. The difference was that I wanted to build those things together, and you wanted to build them in spite of me." "That's not true." "Then why did you invite me here tonight?" she demanded. "Why did you want me to see you marry Madison? What was the point, Robert?" The question hung between them like an accusation. Robert opened his mouth to give the same explanation he'd rehearsed, that it was about closure, about showing there were no hard feelings. But looking at Gabrielle now, seeing the pain he'd caused reflected in her eyes, he couldn't lie anymore. "Because I wanted to prove I was right," he admitted. "I wanted to prove that leaving you was the right decision, that Madison was the better choice, that I'd upgraded rather than just moved on." "And what do you think now?" Robert stared at her, this woman who had become everything he'd claimed she could never be, everything he'd convinced himself he needed in a partner. She was successful beyond his wildest projections, respected by people he'd spent years trying to impress, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was worth. "I think," he said slowly, "that I'm the biggest fool who ever lived." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Outside, the sounds of the reception continued. His wedding reception, to a woman who was perfect for him on paper but who would never challenge him, change him, or love him the way Gabrielle once had. And in that moment, Robert Sterling realized that all his success, all his wealth, all his carefully orchestrated life meant nothing compared to what he'd lost when he let Gabrielle go. But the question that terrified him most was simple. Was it already too late to get her back? The study fell silent except for the distant sounds of celebration filtering through the windows. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses as guests toasted Robert's marriage to another woman. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Gabrielle studied Robert's face, seeing something she'd never witnessed during their marriage: genuine vulnerability. The confident, controlled man who had always had the answers, who had always known exactly what he wanted and how to get it, looked lost. "Robert," she said softly, "you're married? As of 3 hours ago, you're married to a wonderful woman who loves you and deserves better than a husband who's questioning his choices on his wedding night." "I know," he said, running his hands through his hair. "God, Gabrielle, what have I done?" "You've built the life you thought you wanted," she replied, not unkindly. "Madison is everything you said you needed: sophisticated, connected, from the right family. She'll be an asset to your empire, a perfect hostess for your business dinners, exactly the kind of wife a man like you is supposed to have. But she's not you." The words hung between them like a confession, raw and honest, and 3 years too late. "No," Gabrielle agreed, "she's not me. But Robert, you didn't want me. Not really. You wanted a version of me that didn't exist. Someone with my heart but Madison's pedigree. Someone who would love you unconditionally but never challenge your priorities." She moved closer to him, and for a moment, Robert thought she might reach out, might touch his face the way she used to when she was trying to comfort him. Instead, she kept her distance, professional even in this most personal moment. "Do you want to know what the real tragedy is?" she asked. "It's not that you married the wrong woman tonight. It's that you never learned to see the right one when you had her." "I see her now," Robert said desperately. "Gabrielle, I see exactly what I lost. You're everything I—" "Stop." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Don't do this to yourself, and don't do it to Madison. You made your choice 3 years ago, and you made another one today. Honor them." Before Robert could respond, a soft knock at the study door interrupted them. Madison's voice came through the heavy wood, careful and controlled. "Robert? Darling, people are asking for you. We should probably cut the cake soon." Gabrielle and Robert looked at each other, both understanding that this moment, whatever it was ending. "Go," Gabrielle said quietly. "Go be a good husband to your wife." Robert stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face. "Will I see you again?" "Probably," Gabrielle said with a sad smile. "We move in the same circles now. But Robert, next time we meet, I hope it's because we genuinely want to catch up as friends, not because one of us is trying to prove something to the other." "Gabrielle, I know," she said, understanding everything he couldn't say. "I know." Robert walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle, then turned back one last time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm proud of you. What you've built, who you've become, it's extraordinary." "Thank you," she replied. "And Robert, I hope you find happiness. Real happiness, not just success." He nodded once, then opened the door to find Madison waiting in the hallway, resplendent in her wedding gown and trying very hard to pretend she hadn't been worried about what was happening behind that closed door. "There you are," she said with a smile that was only slightly strained. "Ready to rejoin our party?" "Absolutely," Robert said, taking her arm. "Sorry to keep you waiting." As they walked away, Gabrielle heard Madison ask quietly, "Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect," Robert replied, and Gabrielle wondered if he was trying to convince his wife or himself. 30 minutes later, Gabrielle made her way back to the reception, where the party was reaching its peak. The cake had been cut, a towering confection that probably cost more than most people's cars. Toasts had been made, all praising the perfect couple and their bright future, and the dance floor was full of guests celebrating the union of two people who looked beautiful together and seemed utterly compatible. She found William Chen waiting for her at their table, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "There you are," he said with genuine warmth. "I was beginning to think you'd escaped through a window." "Tempting," Gabrielle admitted, accepting the champagne, "but I promised you another dance." As they moved onto the dance floor, Gabrielle became aware that she and Robert were dancing near each other. She with William, he with Madison. The couples moved in parallel orbits, occasionally close enough to make eye contact, but worlds apart in every way that mattered. "You know," William said as they swayed to the music, "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. About collaboration between our companies." "Oh." Gabrielle's attention was fully on him now, grateful for the distraction from the complicated emotions swirling around her. "Washington Global's approach to sustainable business practices aligns perfectly with my fund's investment philosophy. I think we could do remarkable things together." "I'd be very interested in exploring that," Gabrielle said, and realized she meant it. William was intelligent, accomplished, and treated her as an equal partner rather than a beautiful accessory. More importantly, he saw her clearly, not as a woman trying to be something she wasn't, but as exactly who she was. "Perhaps dinner next week? I'll be in Chicago on Thursday." "I'd like that very much." As the song ended, Gabrielle found herself genuinely smiling for the first time all evening. Not the polite, social smile she'd worn throughout the reception, but a real expression of happiness and possibility. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bandleader announced, "the bride and groom will now share their last dance of the evening before departing for their honeymoon." The floor cleared except for Robert and Madison, who moved together in perfect synchronization to a romantic ballad. They were stunning, a fairy tale couple beginning their happily ever after. But as Gabrielle watched them, she noticed what she'd observed earlier. They danced beautifully together, but there was no real connection. They looked like performers playing their parts rather than lovers lost in each other. "They make a handsome couple," William observed, following her gaze. "They do," Gabrielle agreed. "They're perfectly suited for each other." And they were, she realized. Robert and Madison were both people who valued image over intimacy, success over vulnerability, perfect compatibility over messy, complicated love. They would probably have a very successful marriage. Organized, impressive, exactly what both their families wanted. "Shall we get some air?" William suggested. "It's gotten rather warm in here." They walked out onto the terrace overlooking the bay, where the lights of Miami twinkled like stars reflected in the water. Other guests had had the same idea, and small groups clustered around cocktail tables, their conversations mixing business deals with social gossip. "Gabrielle." She turned to find Jessica Morrison approaching, slightly breathless and clearly having had several glasses of champagne. "I have to tell you," Jessica said without preamble, "I owe you an apology." "Several apologies, actually." "Jessica, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. During your marriage to Robert, I was awful to you. Condescending, dismissive, acting like you didn't belong in our social circle." Jessica's words tumbled out in a rush of alcohol-fueled honesty. "I thought you were just some middle-class girl who'd gotten lucky by marrying rich." Gabrielle remained diplomatically silent, but she remembered those interactions vividly, the subtle put-downs, the exclusion from social events, the way Jessica and others had made her feel like an outsider in her own marriage. "But watching you tonight," Jessica continued, "seeing how accomplished you've become, how respected you are, I realize I was completely wrong about you. You weren't the one who didn't belong. You were the one who was too good for us." The admission was startling in its honesty. Around them, other conversations had quieted as people listened to Jessica's public confession. "Thank you for saying that," Gabrielle said graciously. "But you weren't wrong about me, Jessica. I was exactly who you thought I was back then." someone trying desperately to fit into a world that felt foreign to me. The difference is that now I've created my own world, and I'm comfortable in it. Your own world where you belong at the center, not the margins, William observed approvingly. Exactly, Gabrielle smiled at him, then looked back at Jessica. I don't need to fit into anyone else's vision of success anymore. I've defined it for myself. 1 hour later, the reception was winding down. Many guests had already departed, offering congratulations and air kisses as they made their way to waiting cars. The bride and groom had left 20 minutes earlier in a shower of rose petals and good wishes, heading to the airport for their honeymoon in the Maldives. Gabrielle stood near the entrance, waiting for her car, when Victoria Sterling approached one final time. But the older woman's demeanor had changed completely from their earlier encounter. Gabrielle, she said quietly, could I speak with you for a moment? They walked a few steps away from the other departing guests, finding a quiet corner near the garden. I owe you an apology, Victoria said without preamble. My behavior tonight was inexcusable. Gabrielle raised an eyebrow, surprised by the admission. I was threatened by you, Victoria continued. During your marriage to Robert, and especially tonight. I could see how accomplished you'd become, how respected you are, and I lashed out because I knew Robert had made a mistake by letting you go. Mrs. Sterling, please, let me finish. I spent 3 years telling myself that Robert was better off without you, that Madison was the right choice for him. But watching him tonight, seeing the way he looked at you, Victoria shook her head sadly. He married the wrong woman, and we both know it. The admission hung between them like a secret. But that's not your fault, and it's not your problem to solve, Victoria continued. You've built an extraordinary life for yourself, and you deserve every bit of happiness that comes with it. Thank you, Gabrielle said softly. That means more than you know. For what it's worth, I always hoped he'd find his way back to you. But now I hope you're too smart to take him back. Before Gabrielle could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from her driver. Her car had arrived. I should go, she said. Of course. Victoria hesitated, then reached out to squeeze Gabrielle's hand briefly. Take care of yourself, dear. And don't look back, there's nothing behind you worth your time anymore. As Gabrielle walked toward her waiting car, she reflected on the evening's surreal journey. She'd come to Robert's wedding expecting to feel vindicated by her success, to prove to herself and everyone else that she'd moved beyond the pain of their divorce. Instead, she discovered something more valuable. She didn't need vindication anymore. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, including herself. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and that was enough. 6 months later, Chicago. Gabrielle stood in her corner office, reviewing proposals for Washington Global's newest initiative, a partnership with the United Nations to develop sustainable business practices in developing countries. It was the kind of work that combined her passion for social justice with her business acumen, exactly the sort of project she dreamed of during those long, lonely evenings when she'd been married to Robert. Knock, knock. Alicia appeared in the doorway with coffee and a knowing smile. How's the UN proposal coming? Better than expected. I think we can actually make a real difference with this project. Speaking of making a difference, Alicia settled into the chair across from Gabrielle's desk. William Chen called. Chen. That's what, the 15th time this month. Gabrielle smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. He's persistent. He's smitten. And for good reason. Alicia studied her best friend's face. You're glowing, Gabby. I haven't seen you this happy since, well, maybe ever. It was true. The past 6 months had been extraordinary, professionally and personally. Washington Global was expanding faster than she'd ever imagined. She'd been invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, and Time magazine had indeed featured her on their cover as one of the most influential people under 40. But more than the professional success, she'd found something she hadn't expected: genuine happiness. Her relationship with William had developed naturally, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of easy compatibility that made her wonder why she'd ever thought love had to be complicated. "He's asked me to move to San Francisco," she said quietly. Alicia's eyebrows shot up. "That's serious." "It is. His fund is opening a new office focused on impact investing, and he wants me to consider a partnership that would merge our companies." "And personally?" Gabrielle was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Personally, I think I might be falling in love with him. Really, truly in love. Not the desperate, anxious need for approval I thought was love before. But nothing. No buts. That's the amazing part. For the first time in my life, a relationship feels simple. Right." Before Alicia could respond, Gabrielle's assistant knocked on the open door. "Ms. Washington? I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a visitor. Robert Sterling is here to see you." Gabrielle felt her heart skip, but not with the old anxiety or longing. Just surprise. "Send him in," she said calmly. Robert appeared in her doorway looking older than his years, wearing an expensive suit but somehow diminished. The confidence that had once defined him seemed muted, replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. "Hello, Gabrielle," he said quietly. "Robert, this is unexpected." She gestured to the chair Alicia had vacated. "Please, sit down." As he settled into the chair, Gabrielle noticed the absence of his wedding ring. She didn't comment on it, but filed the observation away. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble. "For the wedding, for the way my mother treated you, for everything." "Apology accepted," Gabrielle said simply. "How's Madison?" Robert's face tightened slightly. "We're working through some challenges." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" The question came out sharper than he'd probably intended. Gabrielle considered it seriously. "Yes, actually I am. I hope you both find happiness, Robert. I really do. Even after everything I put you through? Especially because of everything you put me through." She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the calm assessment of someone who'd moved far beyond old hurts. "You forced me to discover who I really was, who I could become when I stopped trying to be who someone else needed me to be. I'm grateful for that, even if the process was painful." Robert stared at her, clearly struggling with something he wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. "Robert," Gabrielle said gently, "why are you here?" "Because I've been miserable for 6 months," he admitted. "Because I married the wrong woman and I know it. Because every day I wake up wishing I could undo the biggest mistake of my life." The confession hung in the air between them. Gabrielle felt sympathy for his pain, but no desire to alleviate it. "I'm sorry you're unhappy," she said sincerely. "But that's not something I can fix for you. I know. I needed you to know that I understand now. What I lost. What I threw away." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with desperate hope. "Gabrielle, is there any chance?" "No," she said quietly but firmly. "There isn't." The rejection was gentle but absolute. Robert sat back as if he'd been slapped. "I don't love you anymore, Robert," Gabrielle continued. "I don't hate you either. I've moved far beyond both emotions. You're part of my past, an important part that helped shape who I became. But you're not part of my future." "Is there someone else?" Gabrielle smiled, thinking of William and the life they were building together. "Yes, there is. Someone who sees me clearly from the beginning, who values what I value, who wants to build something beautiful together rather than trying to fix what's broken." Robert nodded slowly, understanding that this was truly the end. "He's lucky. We both are," Gabrielle said. "Just like you and Madison could be, if you gave your marriage the same energy you're putting into regret." After Robert left, Gabrielle stood at her window looking out at the city she'd conquered, the empire she'd built, the life she'd created from the ashes of her broken dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "Dinner tonight? I have something important to ask you." She smiled, recognizing the tone. After 6 months of building something real together, She suspected she knew what his important question might be. 3 years ago, she'd been a woman trying desperately to be enough for someone who couldn't appreciate her value. Today, she was a woman who knew exactly what she was worth, and had found someone who treasured every bit of it. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is walking away, forcing you to discover that you were never the problem. You were always the solution. You just needed to find the right equation. Have you ever had someone leave your life only to realize later that their departure was the greatest gift they could have given you? Sometimes we mistake settling for less than we deserve for love. And sometimes it takes losing everything to discover we already had everything we needed. We just needed to find it within ourselves. 2 years later, Gabrielle Washington would stand before the United Nations General Assembly, delivering a keynote address on sustainable global development that would be watched by millions and quoted for decades. In the audience, among world leaders and Nobel laureates, William Chen would watch his wife with the same expression he'd worn since the day they met. Pure admiration for a woman who had transformed pain into purpose, setbacks into comebacks, and rejection into the fuel for extraordinary achievement. And somewhere in Miami, Robert Sterling would watch the speech on television in his empty mansion, finally understanding that the greatest success story of his generation wasn't his empire, it was the woman he'd been too blind to value when she was his to treasure.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.